We have 40 years of research into domestic violence from all over the world, 1,700 peer-reviewed papers that all show the same sort of thing. They show that domestic violence is not what we always hear about, men terrorising women. Most violence in the home is two-way violence involving women as well as men. Yes, there are women who are, victims of men who are abusive, of course, but there are also men who are being abused by their wives, physically abused by their wives. And most children growing up in violent homes are watching this two-way violence where parents are having a go at each other. And we are being fed a lie in Australia. Malcolm Turnbull standing up there saying it's all about men's attitude to women. It's not. And we're seeing, Mark, you write about this a lot too. We see denial of the fact that there's this argument that's across every suburb in Australia, every community in Australia. Of course, that's not true. It's 60 times more common in some parts of Australia, poor areas of Australia, than the more affluent areas. There are a whole range of causes underpinning domestic violence we never hear about, such as mental illness and drug and alcohol abuse. We are hearing a tiny part of the story and a really manipulated, distorted view of what is an enormously important social issue.
You may recall Bettina Arndt. I've cited her articles a number of times before in other videos on the topic of domestic violence. Now, about 3 weeks ago, she appeared on Jones & Co. with Mark Latham and Ross Cameron to discuss the topic in detail. This segment is more than 20 minutes long, and I'll leave a link to the full video below. But I just want to focus on a couple of points, first of which is the direction of domestic violence laws in Australia.
Bettina, you've looked at some of the state jurisdictions to see how the pendulum is swinging, particularly in the burden of proof. Is that right in Western Australia now, that if a woman alleges control or intimidation by the male partner, that the partner will automatically be arrested?
Well, he can be. I mean, the police minister in Western Australia last week talked about the fact that they're erring on the side of the victim, that their new laws are all about setting up the victim so that she has more likely to be able to prove her case. And therefore the alleged perpetrator has less and less standing under the law. And so you don't even have to have domestic violence. You don't even have an allegation of violence. You can just say, I'm afraid that because he's controlling or intimidating me in some way, that could lead to violence. That's enough.
So the whole burden is shifting.
The burden's shifting in
to the disadvantage of men.
Absolutely.
In a way that we would never have accepted in the past, in the impartiality, the theoretical impartiality of the judicial system.
And we're seeing across Australia now the premiers, the lawmakers competing to set up laws that are disadvantaged men.
And what's happening in Victoria? Is that right, that a male victim of domestic violence, the authorities will now contact the partner to find out whether or not it's true? That's
been happening for a while now. I was just gobsmacked when I heard this. A male speaking at a conference on suicide said that when men ring up who are suicidal because they're in a relationship with an abusive woman, the police are called in to track down his partner, to question his story. I mean, and everybody there at this conference was just gobsmacked because they said, where's the law, where are the privacy regulations, where's the duty of care to that man? And now the Victorian government has announced they're going to change the privacy regulations to toss them out so that we can protect the victim and we can assume that any man who comes forward as a potential victim of violence may in fact be the perpetrator. That is how the Australian framework, official framework for domestic violence has now been set up, to assume that all male victims might be perpetrators. And in New South Wales, I mean, amazing thing, Prue Goward announced in June she was giving the first ever funding for male victims of violence, a piddling 13 million over 4 years compared to the hundreds of millions that are being spent on women victims. But this was a good thing. They've turned out and they've given the bulk of that money so far to an organisation called the Men's Referral Service, which for many years denied there was even such a thing as a male victim of violence. And then finally they came around a bit and said, oh, well, they're male victims, but it doesn't affect them in the same way, so we don't really need to support them.
This is the outfit that's got the contract to look after the men.
They've got the contract, which didn't even go to tender, open tender. They got the contract, so the fox is in charge of the hen house. And men have to go through this hostile, the men who come in as victims have to go through this hostile screening process, which assumes they're probably perpetrators. I mean, what is this?
What is it? It's a system that's been captured by radical, man-hating feminists and fostered by opportunistic politicians. But what can men do about it?
And men are looking at the costs of being in a relationship. And there's a group of men who are deciding it's all too hard, it's all too dangerous. I mean, why would you commit to caring for your beloved children when you're so at risk? If the woman decides the relationship ends, she can allege he's been violent to her. She can have him locked out of the house. She can have him arrested. She can have, him denied contact with his children. We are setting up the law to give more and more power to the woman in that situation. And sometimes women misuse that power. Years and years ago, I was writing about family law and about the problem a lot of men had. This was back in the 1980s of having contact. A lot of the children were having trouble seeing their dads in that situation. I had a retiring family court judge who came to me, wrote to me and said, we made a big mistake the way we set up the whole family law system. We gave too much power to the custodial parent, which was almost always the woman in that case, and there are some women who misuse that power. Now, in Australia, we're setting up laws across the country that give women enormous power to do men in if they've had enough of those men. And there are going to be women who misuse that power, and that is happening everywhere.
The groups she alluded to that find it all too hard and dangerous are, of course, MGTOW, and that is certainly one way to go about it. Men can just decide not to participate. But what else can they do?
I think originally a lot of politicians got into this debate thinking it was good for the female vote. When you're raising awareness and running advertising campaigns and essentially it's symbolic, you're linking arms, you're not really expecting a hard, tangible result in society. So politicians got into this thinking that here's a way to get the female vote. But there's no doubt now that the pushback against it, the resentment among men, it means that parties are losing an important constituency, the male vote. Now, a lot of the Australian trends here follow what's happened in the United States. The key statistic in the Trump election was that in 2008, Republican candidate John McCain got 49% of the white, non-college educated male vote. And Trump got 68%. 8 years later, got 68%. So a 19% swing to the Republicans for white, non-college educated men. So it's a huge constituency, huge voting power, and it swept him into office. And I think, basically men talk to me about this and related issues just about everywhere, at sporting grounds, the racetrack, shopping centres, schools, and they know what's going on. They're very articulate about it, and they've got a quiet determination to express themselves through the ballot box. So
about time
this has got to be a rising issue, hasn't it?
It absolutely does. I mean, men notice that everyone's lobbying for gays. I mean, it's all this identity politics, women, you name it. Everybody gets votes and carrots thrown at them. The only person that nobody cares about are heterosexual white men. I mean, they are never mentioned. And as we've said, the laws are being increasingly stacked against them in all sorts of situations. And they're noticing. It's interesting, we have men's issue groups springing up on the internet all over, international conferences starting up. Australia is really well known for this groundswell of activity that's been going on for years now, where more and more Australian men are joining these organisations. We're having a big international conference here next year on men's issues where international speakers are coming. I think we're going to see some change in Australia, but we're already beginning to see it, as you say, Mark.
Yeah. Well, the media don't get it, though. Just yesterday in the Sydney Morning Herald, Jessica Irvine wrote as follows: "Make no mistake, the rise of the political parties led by Donald Trump and Pauline Hanson are part of a backlash against the advancement of women and minorities into the workforce and the overturning of traditional male breadwinner models." So what she's saying is because women are getting better jobs and men relatively are getting worse jobs, this is part of the male backlash. But it's not that at all, because most men, Ross and myself included, have got daughters, and we welcome rising female participation rates and opportunities. We welcome the fact that 60% of university graduates in Australia each year are female. We want that for our daughters. We want the very best career for them. The backlash is not about changes in the workforce. It's about the demonisation of men, false allegations being made in the domestic violence debate, and the fact that in identity politics, white men are left out of all the considerations and are now, quite unusually enough, are classifying themselves as disadvantaged. White men now see themselves in the media debate and the political debate as the disadvantaged group. That's why they're concerned. And not just the men. I mean, of course, Trump got plenty of females voting for him too. And these are the mothers and the sisters and the, the families of men who they see being done over. Yeah. And it's the same happens here. I get just as many letters from women as I do from men saying, what is happening here? Why was Malcolm Turnbull out there, promising all this stuff to women and not giving us stuff about men? I mean, why are all the politicians in this bidding war to try to win the women's vote? We don't want that. We want men and women in violent situations to be protected, not just women. We want children in violent homes to be protected. And the person they're most at risk from, of course, is their mothers. I have women writing to me saying, my mother was abusive. No one wants to hear about that.
So let me suggest to the current Australian government's largest constituency of voters out there, straight white men. If the current government continues with its overtly biased stance toward domestic violence in this country, the continued disenfranchisement of men in the family law courts, and the complete neglect of issues facing men, then it's time to take it to the ballot box.